Welcome back to Got No Control podcast. I am your host, RONEK. And before I introduce my special guest, I want to invite you guys to head over to gotnocontrol.com and check out our official merchandise, t-shirts, hoodies, and much more. Gotnocontrol.com. Also, make sure to come out October 5th here in the city of Long Beach. We are celebrating our 3-year anniversary. So come out, have some fun. We're going to have Hex TGO painting live, classic cars on displays, vendors, music, and much more. So come celebrate with us. 3 years. I appreciate every single one of you guys. I also want to give a shout out to our sponsor, 360 Spray Paint. 360 Spray Paint is a spray paint company that is manufactured out of Mexico, and they aim to offer high quality spray paint to all spray paint enthusiasts. So make sure to check them out at 360 California. And with that being said, I want to give a special warm welcome to my guest today, Posh. How you doing today, brother?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
It's been a long time coming, brother. We've been in talks for this interview for quite some time now. Life always gets in the way, but I'm extremely happy to have you here today.
Yeah, thank you, brother, for having me, for sure.
And thank you for stopping by the studio and, giving me a little bit of your time in this hot day today.
Yeah, of course. No problem.
I just wanted to dive into your early beginnings, brother, right? For Posh. What is home to Posh, and how did it look like coming up as a teen or as a child for Posh?
Yeah, so I grew up in Orange County in the city of Orange.
Okay.
And it was pretty typical suburban upbringing, right?
Yeah.
I grew up in a house with parents. They weren't like, the nicest parents, but
Okay.
they were there. They were
Yeah.
present, and they did their basic stuff, right, that they were supposed to do. I didn't, I didn't have to grow up terribly hard.
Okay.
But the honest truth is, I still was pretty angry at the world for a lot of reasons. And, by the time I was 13, I was already into the punk scene, and, that anger and that energy kind of already was resonating with me.
Okay.
And then my teen years were mostly going to punk shows and, going up to LA and then going to local punk shows. Orange County had a really incredible punk scene, and a lot of bands that came out of there. And
Shout out Orange County.
Yes, sir.
Many would consider an individual like yourself, right, that comes from I wouldn't say, I can't say, right, because I wasn't there, but a mom and dad, a structured family, right, rather than coming from a broken family. And I feel like some will feel that just because you don't come from a broken place, you're kind of not entitled to the same things that they are just because they struggled more for those things. What is your take on that?
Yeah, so that's a good question, and I think it's been my responsibility when I got into graffiti and I started to hang out with some other folks. Like I had already in high school, I obviously had friends who came from different place than me, right?
Yeah.
And I had friends in Santa Ana who certainly came up from a different place than me, right? So I already kind of understood the difference between my life and theirs.
Yeah.
But with graffiti, once I started to meet more and more graffiti writers, and I understood where they came from and where their drive to do what they were doing came from, I think it was important to me to respect that, understand it, and understand like that my privilege, my perspective was different, right? And I had to really understand that a lot of people were doing the work they were doing coming from a place of like, that's what they had, literally, that they didn't make a choice to do graffiti. They had choice between gangs or graffiti. I mean, that was, and most of those guys, like, I think that really influenced my approach to graph. I think I've always had respect for people who come from humble circumstances. And I think if you ask me like who some of my favorite writers are, they come from really not great circumstances, but yet have done amazing things, and they're really well known, right? So, I think it was my job in this space, right, to be authentically myself and not try to front, not try to pretend I was something I wasn't, not try to put on a persona like I'm something else, right? So like my name Posh stands for Port Out Starboard Home, which was the kind of the expensive accommodations on a cruise ship, right? So we used to have cruise ships that would go from England to the US, right? In the Atlantic. So if you were in the posh accommodations, those were the ones on the non-sunny side of the ship. So your room wasn't getting cooked the entire trip and then back the other direction, right? So that name, Posh, like from the beginning, my name already embodied that kind of like, you know, I wasn't ashamed. And I also haven't flaunted it, right? Like just because it's in my name, I've never said to someone like, you know, I'm better than you because I come from some place like that, right?
It's kind of like that movie Titanic when he's in the ship, right? He's like in the very low bottom. And then he falls in love with the girl. Is like at the upper class.
Yeah, upper class. And she was on the absolutely on the posh accommodations on that ship. Yeah. So but I think the key has always been that to have respect for people, understand where they come from, and go meet them where they're at. So like also I've never been afraid to like, you know, explore other people's the way they live and go to places maybe that wouldn't be comfortable for someone where I came from, you know?
Definitely. And what about this culture gravitated you? Like you could have been chasing a sport, a dream, you know, being a car enthusiast, so many other things, right? Yeah. But what about this culture gravitated you in and made you want to dedicate your time and an effortless amount of bad or good experiences to be part of this culture?
Yeah, and take the kind of risks that I've taken that I didn't have to. Yeah, that's a good question. So, like, honestly, punk rock in its core is about, like, you know, questioning the system, breaking down the system.
Definitely.
And it's about action. Punk rock isn't like the mohawk you wear. Sure, a mohawk makes a statement. It says, like, I don't care, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But punk is often about, like, just your willingness to be something outside the system and what they want you to be, right?
Yeah.
And what they're telling you to be, what they're demanding you be. And so for me, graffiti was like literally punk in action, right?
Okay.
Like it was the idea that you're not going to let anybody tell you where to do your thing, how to do it, you know, and to express yourself, right? It's about like, and I don't mean that in the cliche way people say that, like, oh, I'm expressing myself. I mean like the act of doing it is an expression that says, yeah, you're not able to cage me, you're not able to make me do the things you want me to do and live exactly the kind of life you want, be around the people you tell me I should be around, and absorb the culture you tell me that I should absorb, right? So,
Definitely.
So graffiti for me always was like this literal manifestation of that punk rock attitude.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing that made me gravitate to it the most. And like, that's why, you know, a lot of people have rules and they got stacks of rules. They got rules on top of rules.
Yeah.
And at its core, like some of my favorite writers don't care about like those rules very much, right? They break all the rules, including those of graph, right? Like some of my friends that I call really close friends, you're not going to tell them like that's not cool in graph, right? They're going to do what they want to do, and so yeah, I mean, when it boils down to it, punk is there in graffiti, and that's probably what gravitated to me the most.
You know, punk rock, the whole culture of punk rock is extremely important to me because coming up, all my crewmates, my best friends, my brothers were punk rockers to the bone. You know, mohawks, spikes, you know,
all that.
Bullets and all that stuff, right? And by bullets, I don't mean like shooting people, but I mean bullets like on belts and stuff, right?
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about the punk rock scene for you. How did that come into your life? Because to my knowledge, punk rock wasn't made here in the United States. It comes from somewhere else. Some type of punk rock, you could say. I mean, the United States obviously established their own style of punk rock, but they say, I might be wrong, don't quote me, but they say that punk rock comes from another part of the world. So how did this culture come into your life?
Well, so yeah, like I was lucky to grow up in Southern California, right? And what I mean is so the Ramones, 1975 was the Ramones. I was young, right? I was a kid, I was a very young kid at that point. But by the late 70s, early 80s, right, when I'm starting to get older, the LA punk scene was just popping, right? So you had X and you had all the Black Flag and a lot of other bands that were here in LA, and the LA scene was pretty active, right? So by the mid early 80s, you had bands out of Huntington Beach that were on the Rodney on the Rock radio show. So the Rodney on the Rock radio show was on KRQ on Sunday nights, late at night. And so someone like me, a kid, 12, 13, was hearing this music and getting exposed to it. And some of these bands were local, right? This band, The Crowd, was from Huntington Beach. And you had local people in Orange County, Agent Orange, right, was from this way. So you had and Social Distortion, right? So these bands that were coming up in the early 80s had a scene, right? And we had a spot called the Cuckoo's Nest down there that you could go.
Nest?
Yeah, you could go see shows. So there's a Vandals song where they sing about the Cuckoo's Nest in that. And it's got this country kind of sound to it. Yeah. And that's about this venue. So we had a lot of spots to go see gigs here. And then in LA, there were plenty of all ages gigs to go see punk shows. And so by 13, 14, I was able to start going to shows. And I met these kids by 14, I met a couple kids that were into punk, and one in particular. And that, between the radio station, listening to that music and buying these tapes, Rodney on the Rock tapes. And then this friend of mine that really started to take me to shows and introduced me to it more, that I just kept going. And then by high school, I had a couple of friends that were like skater kids that were super into punk. And this kid Al, and was another Al. And so it was like Al and Al, and we were like into punk. And we went to all the shows together and parties together. And it's like, and so the vibe, the punk vibe, I was lucky to grow up in Southern California. We got all the bands in LA, right? Like anybody who toured in the US came to LA. When the Bad Brains came through, they'd come to LA, right? They played Cal State Long Beach a couple times. I saw the Bad Brains more than once here. And I saw shows, I saw them down at the spot Iguanas down in TJ, actually. And that was an insane show. Like the dudes jumping from the rafters, literally like up. They had a balcony in Iguanas, and people like not stage diving, but balcony diving into the crowd, right? So I was lucky. I got to see kind of this growth of our own scene in Orange County. There were a lot more bands. Everyone toured through, and you could see just about every band that was touring if you wanted to. And then the shows were cheap, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Cheap, like super cheap. So, I saw X at Cal State Fullerton with Jane's Addiction opening for them, right?
Oh, wow.
And this was $5, this show, right? And $5 was like, oh man, we got to pay $5.
Yeah.
Boo-hoo, right?
That could be $240s, but
it was right. So we were not like, but it was worth it. This show was awesome. And like, that was a crazy show because this was an early Jane's Addiction show. They weren't really punk, right? They were this weird kind of their own thing. And the crowd just hated them at the time, right? So the crowd was there to see X, and Jane's Addiction was on stage, and they got booed and they yelled. People were yelling. Perry Farrell like threw a bottle of something on people. It was like really confrontational interaction. By the end of the show, though, these punk people were like, oh, I don't know. That was pretty good. There was some good music in that. Like they were feeling it, right? And then X came on and they warmed up for X, right? So I was lucky to see things like that where they said, oh, their album's coming out. And I got their first album on green vinyl, right? Like clear,
you still have it
clear
to
green
today?
vinyl. Yeah.
Oh,
I have
wow.
that first, the triple X album. They had a live album before that, but that was their first like studio album release, right?
When it comes to the punk rock culture, right? I know that punk rocks are very creative as well, right? Because you guys will have to draw the bands or whatnot on jackets with markers. So is it fair to say that there was something there when it came to a punk rock community as far as like, I don't know if I could call it graffiti, but some type of art movement there?
No, there was. So there was the flyer scene was something else. So this dude, still to this day, Victor Gastelum is a dude that used to do flyers for Fenders and stuff. I've got him on IG. He's like a dude I respect from way back, like doing these art flyers.
Yeah.
And there was a whole scene with that. I have a little flyer collection still of all my,
really?
from 80s flyers of punk stuff. And, there was a lot of art in that.
Yeah.
The painted jackets. And then graffiti, like my actual start writing on people's stuff, my start doing that was way before style writing, right? It was anarchy symbols,
and peace
definitely
signs
and that kind of graffiti in that sense. I wouldn't call that. It wasn't art. Let's not exaggerate what that was. Like I certainly was writing on people's stuff I shouldn't and putting symbols they maybe or felt or didn't feel. But
I used to be fantasized by that though, because I would see these punk rock bands logos or like the flyers, right? And I would just be like, who's drawing all this? Like, where is this all coming from? Like, is it coming from the top of the head? And I would start asking around, like, hey, bro, who drew this? Like, what does this mean? And then I started learning the anarchist sign, the oi, you know what I mean? So I always felt like that kind of gravitated to me a little bit because it was like, this is pretty cool, but what is it, you know?
There was also, so like the other thing is you had, the punk gang culture did tag, right?
Yeah.
They did write their stuff. So like in Orange County, we would see lads tags. We would see Peanut in the late 80s before they became like full-blown skinhead gang, right?
Okay.
But yeah, they would catch little tags as if they were, gangsters, right? And then up in LA, you had an overlap between graffiti and punk rock for sure. Like there was writers in the 80s, like Pyro, the dudes from LOD, and Plex from GF, right? Like you had, and Power was another, had gone to shows when he was younger. So there was this overlap, even in the 80s when I was still just a punk.
Yeah.
There was already a mix between those scenes, right? And it was already starting to be a thing.
That's definitely an impactful culture that to this day is still going. Shout out to the whole punk rock community. Nothing but love to you guys. Being a punk rock, right? At what point do you get introduced to graffiti, and what was the early sightings of graffiti for you?
Yeah, so I went to college in Santa Barbara, right?
Okay.
So I said I grew up in Orange. I went to college in Santa Barbara, and so in 88, I started to look at the place to go to school, but 89 is when I went up there. And so I would drive up the 5, past the 101, all the way up to Santa Barbara, right? So I went straight through the heart in 89. I was going through straight the heart of LA, right? Like
so you were driving and just like, whoa, what is all this?
Yeah, so this is when those freeway walls up there off the 101, those sound walls, and before they were big sound walls, they were smaller walls back then. They weren't these big monstrosities that eventually they built. They were smaller walls, but they were all smashed, right? So once you hit the 5 coming up into LA from Orange County, I mean, we had writers in Orange County then, but very few. And we could talk about Orange County writers eventually. But going up to LA, it was like walls of just smashed walls. So you'd see like sleaze and angst just crushing down there up the 5. Once I got up into Hollywood, you'd see Power and Charlie. Like Charlie was up a lot with Power, and they painted with this dude Milk from Germany a lot. So they had spots. And I would see just, full color pieces on those walls. They weren't like now just quick throws.
Although these guys were like doing full color
little mini productions on the walls back then, right? So for me, it was mind blowing. I was astounded because you could see it in the day. Most of my trips up to LA as a punk kid, I come up at night. I go to the show at night. Maybe I saw the stuff I didn't really see it as much when I was driving it during the day and I saw those walls, and it was like peak damage. It was impactful, right? Like that was, I knew it was wild behavior and I liked it, right? And then it was colorful. I liked all the all the work. There was a lot of like talent behind that work that was happening at that time.
And eventually, do you kind of do your research on like who was doing all this, or do you meet somebody?
So when I got up there to school, there was this dude on my floor. I was hanging out with him, and we were drinking or whatever, hanging out. And I saw these books on his shelf, and he had spray can art, he had subway art.
Okay.
And I was like, hey, let me take a look. So he shared them, and then he said, hey, if you're into this, here are these photo albums. Here's packages I trade with people. Here's their stuff. And he just unleashed stuff on me, right?
Wow.
So I saw, like trades that he had done with pretty well-known people I now know were well-known writers, right? Then I just went, oh, it's a very talented dude, right?
Yeah,
but I
yeah.
didn't really understand. And he was from Amsterdam also, so he had all this stuff from Europe and from Amsterdam, these guys that I would have never been exposed to if not for his collection of photos, right?
Okay.
And then he said, hey, there's these other two writers that are in this building, right? They go to school here, they're in the dorm. You should come meet them. And it was this dude, the first two LA writers I ever met, it was Kous and Clay from BC Crew, both of them from BC Crew.
Okay.
And Kous, I think he went on to be an engineer or something. He was really serious writer. His style was really tech and serious.
Okay.
And then Clay, he was out there still doing a lot more street work, right? And
Yeah.
he was doing work in Santa Barbara. He did some pretty crazy walls up there that there's those writers still know him for, right? So those were my first kind of two exposures to LA writers.
Yeah.
And then Cisco and I painted a lot. We had a crew, SPC. His brother was a writer. And so there were like a couple of us in Santa Barbara. And then, I was at a burrito joint one day. This place called Freebirds.
Freebirds?
Freebirds, yeah.
Okay.
It became a chain, but then it was just one little spot. It was
Okay.
like the college little spot. You go get your burrito, right? Once
Yeah.
you smoke some weed and go smoke some weed and go get your
Yeah,
burrito,
yeah.
right? So I'm in line, and there's this dude in front of me, and he's got a con art shirt on, right? An
Okay.
early one. I don't even know that it said con art on it, but it was a mirror shirt he had designed that had kid tagging a pole and the cops like trying to grab him and shocked that he's doing it. And so I knew he was a writer. Like already you had a uniform back then,
Yeah.
right? We had the Dickies with the t-shirt. And if you were wearing a graffiti t-shirt
Yeah.
back in, this is like late 89, early 90, I knew for a fact, like, oh, this guy's a writer, so let me hit him up. Because back then, you hit up everybody, right? It was,
Yeah.
hey, what do you write? What do you write? Now I'm a little less like that, but
Yeah.
then it was the thing, right? So I said, hey, you write? And he turns around, he goes, yeah, I write. And it was Anger from CBS. So,
Oh, wow.
So that was the first dude where, like, he was cool, man. He was cool. We vibed. We didn't have a lot of time to talk, but he said, oh, man, let me get your number. And, if something, or let me get your pager. Because I think back then we had landlines and pagers, right? There was no cell phone back then. He said, yeah, I'll page you, give me a call or whatever. So it wasn't too long after that he hit me up and we connected more.
And just to take a quick rewind, brother. So you're in Santa Barbara. You meet this guy from Amsterdam that has a collection of photos, right? And he starts introducing, and then you meet these two writers from LA. But at what point do you pick up your name and you start developing a name? Like, what am I going to call myself? I really want to enter this and then start building a style. Like, how does that begin for you?
So the want to do it happened the day I saw those books. Like there was no time period between those books, him showing me stuff, me knowing he was a writer, and me saying, yeah, this is happening. When do we go do our first wall? Right? I was ready by the end of that day. I literally didn't leave that room before knowing that's what I was going to do. Right?
Okay, gotcha.
And my first name was Hap, H-A-P.
Okay.
And it was easy. I have like a tattoo of happy face, and it was like, oh, cool. Like, it was, wasn't the most well thought out name. I thought like, well, I'm a happy guy, so Hap, that sounds good. So that's gonna be my name. And then I went. I think within a day. I think the next day we went to a wall that was down near the school. and I did my first like this walking happy face character coming out of the wall. Like imagine the Kool-Aid Man, but a happy face, right?
Yeah.
It was terrible. I may want to post that on IG soon just to make people laugh. Like it's crazy bad, right?
Yeah.
But it was fun, right? And so painting with this guy, that was kind of the start of it. And then we painted more together. He schooled me up on some basics. He started to give me sketches. You know, I have those original sketches in my books.
Okay.
And like that was the start of the first name that I had. And then I started to think of other names, right? And, and it wasn't too long before I had come up with Posh as kind of like the appropriate name. And this is like, so the thing to keep in mind, this is before Posh Spice and any of this nonsense, right? There was no association with girls with the name Posh, right? Posh meant something. It had nothing to do with like a girl's name, right? Until the Spice Girls ruined that shit, right? So yeah, man, that was kind of the origin of it. Once I really started to get more serious, and I said, half these letters are wacky. Like ending with a P is weird. Starting with an H is strange. It was hard to form anything up with that.
Yeah,
and you know, honestly, the other letters, POSH was easier for me to flow with, right?
I know you shared with us what Posh means. But coming up with the name Posh, was it kind of like just scribbling letters around? Or did you see it somewhere? Or was it kind of like an emotion, a feeling? Or how did that build?
So, you know, okay, so there was a movie that was, I forget the name of this movie, but it's an 80s movie about a bad high school, right?
Okay.
And this bad high school, they obviously had some set designer or whatever catch a bunch of tags in there. And I could have sworn I saw like a Posh in there, right?
Mm.
Like... And at the time, I didn't think of like what that meant to take someone's tag if that's what their name was, right?
Yeah.
That I'd be using their name.
Okay.
But that's the truth. I saw the movie. I said, "Oh, that name Posh. That resonates with me. That's like that. It's fitting. It works, and like I like the meaning of it, and I like the letters, right?
Yeah.
And that was really it. It wasn't more complex than that. It didn't have a whole lot of depth other than, I felt like it was a name that could work from the writing perspective, and then also, it had a meaning that I resonated with me.
Is it fair to say that Posh was born in Santa Barbara, or were you already coming from Orange County with the writing mentality as far as graffiti?
Oh no, there's no question that it was born in Santa Barbara in the sense that that's where the transition to style writing happened, right? So when I went back to Orange County, I started to pay a lot more attention to who was up and who those early crews were. And when I would come back and visit, I could see what was happening. So like even in 91, I was painting the Huntington Beach walls down in Orange County. I would go down there. I had friends in Orange County that were writers. And like that scene, once the Huntington Beach walls came, the scene like exploded. Like that was the worst decision ever. For the city. They thought, and for the county, they thought if we put these walls in here, that's going to calm down what's growing, the graffiti that's growing. And instead, it attracted everything terrible, like in terms of, well, to them, terrible. To me, it was exciting. It meant that like some of the crews that, that are known to this day, like D2D would go down there and destroy Orange County. EK, which is a crew I'm in now, formed around that time period and crushed the freeways all over Orange County. So like that scene, like it was cool for people to come down and paint, and when I met Charlie, and Dream actually was at that wall at Huntington Beach, and so it was a place where you could meet people also from LA that were coming down to Orange County. But yeah, that energy that created was contagious, and like those freeways, once that happened, it spread quickly all over, and it went from like, you had NASA, you had a couple DCVs that were on the edge of Orange County, but mostly NASA was known for their early Orange County stuff. They had pieces on walls that had never been touched, and they did full color stuff like Zebster, just had an old name back then, Rich, and they had different names, but they were up and not up like crazy tagging up, but like really critical key little spots with burners with beautiful pieces, right?
I read that they thought it was going to be like an outdoor gallery where people could come and even just your traditional artists come with brush and paint and everybody was going to coordinate together. But I'm not sure exactly what happened that got them in a negative airspace. Because to my knowledge, everybody would just go down there, hang out, paint by the beach, enjoy the beach, and just, throw up a piece and have fun. But I'm not sure exactly what happened as far as putting the whole situation in a negative airspace. What is your take on that? Like, what do you believe that kind of got it to shut down?
Just the damage.
Okay.
I mean, there's no question that like the damage that was being done in that adjacent neighborhood, like in Huntington Beach. Huntington Beach went from a pretty buttoned up place. You might see some punk graffiti, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's where we would go if we wanted to go fight skinheads. That was Huntington Beach, right? So like they were down there, right? And they would write swastikas and stupid stuff down there, right? So there was that, but you didn't have graffiti yet, right? And then it blew up, and I would say that Orange County wasn't ready for that. It wasn't like LA where it was graffiti was already everywhere by 89. Everything was crushed up here. Like I'm sorry, it was already like done. Orange County was clean still, and it changed overnight. Like it went from, hey, we're doing this nice thing for you guys. Hey, come paint our illegal wall to, wait, like, well, who are all these guys just writing on everything? And like, those crews, they came with a mentality. A lot of them, the tagging crews in particular, changed it because they were out for damage, pure, simple. Like it wasn't like NASA where they do a little piece here and there. These guys were out to like destroy every inch of blank concrete, wall space, center divider, overhangs, like heavens. Like they were. It was potent and vicious, right? Like in terms of the output. And I think it was obvious it was going to have an effect. Like I saw it and I knew there's no way this goes on forever. They're going to shut the walls.
Definitely.
And then they think that shutting that's going to stop it. But the genie was out of the bottle. It was already done. Like there was no putting that back in at that point. Orange County then had established tagging crews that were battling each other and going at it, like really going at it hard. And those battles were impetus, like they were the drive to really destroy even more, right? So you had crews that it was do or die for their names, or like do or die for 300 cans or whatever it was. And those guys battled insanely hard up there, right?
Is there a battle that you could share with us that kind of stood out more than others for you, or you were like, damn, these guys are just hitting it hard? Yeah,
so the battle that I still remember to this day was the EK SSK. There was a 44 battle, so they wrote 44 behind it. It was EK 44, SSK 44. It was the 44 battle. Yeah. And that was probably the craziest thing I had ever seen, right? Like these guys were the quantity of tags and the just endless, their crews over again, like thousands of tags, right? We're just talking like endless walls of tags. That battle was the one that I would say like stuck in my mind and was the reason that eventually, I felt comfortable getting down with EK. I remember that battle. I wasn't a part of those battles, but I have respect for what they did, where they did it, and what they did during that time period was wild. And then my views on Graph over time changed too, where when they did it, I respected the damage, but I still always thought like, oh, they could evolve to something, right? They could do more than that. But now as I'm older, like I respect it for exactly what it was. Like them doing that, you know what I mean? Them doing that work and going out there and battling each other and having to watch out for each other because it wasn't safe, right? It wasn't just graffiti battling. There was plenty of beef behind that, right? Like there's to this day, if the SSK EK beef isn't active or anything like that, but there's people that still have hard feelings about that. That if that would disagree with me on that.
I think it's a beautiful thing how someone like yourself that wasn't part of the battle, right, and witnessed the battle could kind of relate and admire what's going on, right? Like even though you didn't take part of it, but you were there, you watched it, you absorbed that energy because they were releasing an energy, right, where it was kind of like we're out. to get ours no matter what. We're here to win, and we're not here to lose. And to be able to admire that energy, I feel like it's something very, it's cultivating, right? It's amazing because you're watching something being built and something that's going on, and now you're able to be like, damn, I remember that, right?
For sure, and that's why. Look, that why it wasn't a hard decision when I decided to get down with those guys. Like I'm still friends with Theme EK from back then. We're close friends, and yeah, man, I respect them for what they did. And a lot of them went on to do other things. They went on to like be into car culture. Or they went on to do hip hop stuff, or they went on to do all kinds of other stuff, right?
Yeah.
But the core kind of vibe of that crew is like, yeah, doing damage, and that for me, at some point, it goes back to the roots of the punk stuff, right? Like what that's about. Those guys, there's not a lot of punk dudes in that crew. They were hip hop dudes, and more, breakers, hip hop dudes.
Because I'm a fair believer, brother. Like if you're gonna do something, go full force, bro. Don't half-ass it, right? Like if you're gonna go in, go in. That's how I've always seen everything that I've done. You know what I mean? And that's my perspective on doing something like that. Like these guys really went in. And shout out to the whole EK. And you said the other one was
SSK.
SSK. Shout out to all them guys. Being an Orange County guy, right, brother? Can you share with me, to your knowledge, what are the very early crews that you were seeing come up? Or if not crews, writers?
So it was definitely those NASA dudes. All of them were Orange, like up in Orange County and in key places, like on the 405 and places where you like didn't go do graffiti, right? Like, but they did. On the 55, they had a wall in Tustin where you drive, where Orange turns into Tustin, and it was this little cutback on the wall that they had done. And then Zebster, I remember this spot off the 91 near the 55 that was out in a field, and he did a full Zebster, like his whole name, and it was full color and really dope. So those guys were some of the earliest dudes I saw. And then these guys from NBA crew were an early crew, that were around. Rest in peace, IKEA from NBA. He was around. Rest in peace. And this other kid, so they did some early stuff. And then, in general, there wasn't, a whole lot of other writers. I mean, I think it was few and far between. I found out later that a dude at my high school, so there was a kid who was tagging, and I found out later that this dude who was a junior 1 year behind me, I found out a few years ago that this guy was a dude I know. So I used to party with him. I used to hang out with him. He drove this lowered truck. He wrote TENS, TENS, right? TENS.
Okay.
And I didn't realize, like, he was literally right there with me, and I didn't know it in high school, right? So later, knowing that he was there and he was up, he would catch little tags here and there when I was still in high school. So that's before I had even really fully gone in on it, he was already catching tags and stuff. So he had been around. But
definitely,
mostly down there, it was nothing but you had like most of the gangs. Santa Ana had graffiti, but it was all gang graffiti, right? So not too many other writers down there, to be honest. It was pretty few and far between.
Did you kind of like pay attention to the gang graffiti? Kind of like, oh, what is that? Or was it kind of like, oh, it's there, but I'm just like not paying attention to it?
No, so I paid attention because it taught you where to go. So like, I'll be blunt, man. I go to Santa Ana to buy drugs sometimes, right? And you pay attention to what neighborhood you're in and who you thought you were getting your stuff from and where, right? And so I mean, I paid attention to who was up, where they were up, what areas they were controlling. Like, there's no doubt I was paying attention to it. And then I think I was into also the hand styles, right? They were already doing some advanced hand styles then, even though they were crossing each other out, and it was like based on some other vibe, right? But they had style already to that stuff. So I mean, that's probably between the little punk graffiti and then the gang graffiti, that was my first exposure to graffiti in general. It was like mostly gang tags, to be honest.
I wanted to dive into, brother, you mentioned that in Santa Barbara, That's where you kind of like picked up graffiti 100%. But I'm assuming at that point of time, right? It's not like today where you could just gone to like down the street and there's a graffiti shop, right? So when it came to being in Santa Barbara, how did you go about like being able to obtain some paint?
Yeah, so it's a combination of stuff. Like in terms of understanding the culture and the vibe and tips and things like that.
Yeah.
You know, we were stealing Blair spray adhesive tips, right? We had testers back then when they called them a tester.
Okay.
It was actually from a tester's little spray paint can.
Yeah.
And it wasn't that good of a tip. Like,
Okay.
honestly, like I know people like they called the little white tips eventually from the Blair spray adhesives, and they called those testers.
Yeah.
But they weren't really. Testers had this weird spray to it. It might as well use a stock tip, honestly.
Okay.
I wasn't impressed with it as a tip. So we'd steal our tips. Glass cleaner off of glass cleaner cans, right? Was a way to just get like which are now called New York Fats, right? The white ones. But we used to get those off glass cleaner. And then paint, we had, was it Standard Brands and Builders Emporium back then? And then we had auto parts stores, right? And that was pretty much it. You could get Krylon, you could get like automotive paints and stuff like that, and mostly Krylon back then. And then in terms of like the culture getting exposed to a shop, it was I'd drive down to the hip hop shop to Hex's shop, right? Hex and Omega's shop on Melrose.
What year would you say is this when you start taking the drives down to the hip hop shop?
That's 90, I think, already.
Okay.
Like,
and you already like. You were still going back and forth from Santa Barbara at that point?
At that point, I was still in Santa Barbara.
Okay.
So, yeah, I mean, my whole history, I was in Santa Barbara for years, Orange County for a few years, and then I've been in LA for, 20-something years now, right? Like, I've been in LA a long time. And now I would, if you ask me where I'm from, I'd say I'm from Los Angeles, regardless of all my history. I'm not unproud of where I came from or my college years or whatever, but I'm comfortable in LA. I'm comfortable living where I live.
For me, brother, I'm the type of guy that no matter wherever I'm at, no matter where life takes me, I'm always tell people like I'm from the Harbor area, right? Like that's what I represent to the bone. Do you at times kind of like do that for Orange County?
So look, no, and I'll tell you why.
Okay.
I'll tell you why.
Okay.
So I'm proud of where I grew up.
Yeah.
I'm proud of Orange County. I think it has its value, its moments, right?
Yeah.
But Orange County also is a terrible place in many ways, right? Yeah. It's the kind of place where, where I grew up, the people used the N-word freely, like it was nothing. They used derogatory words towards Jews regularly, right? If you were Asian, it wasn't like it is now, where it's really heavily more Asian than it was. We had Vietnamese folks that had just moved there, right? And it was the 70s, and people weren't like, yeah, it's cool, you came, like, I'll just say it, like, oh, you guys came over on the boat, now you're here, right? Yeah. So Orange County's always been full of haters. Like, it's always been full of haters. It's always been uncomfortable. One of the reasons I liked doing graffiti down there and doing what we did down there was exactly that, to stir that up, to flip them off big time, right? To let them know, like,
screw you guys. We ain't like you guys.
We ain't like you. So I think, like, I'm proud of it. I'm lucky to have grown up there in the sense that I was relatively safe. I had, it was, so I'm not mad about it. Don't get me wrong, right? But am I proud I went through it? Am I proud I earned my, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
No, it's not like that. I'm not ashamed either, right? Like, that's why I'll talk about it. If I was, I might not be willing to discuss it so much. But do I push it? You gonna catch me wearing an OC hat or anything like that?
Yeah.
No, and it's not like I don't respect it. The people that are down there that still do graph or have come up down there, I have the utmost respect for them, because it's always been a hard scene. It's always been heavier punishments. It's always been in Orange. They had a detective who dedicated a lot of time to finding out who these people were, and he would creep around, and he would chase people, and he was like invest. So they had time, they had energy to do that.
What was his name? Do you remember his name?
Nanujian, I think his name was.
Nanujian. Okay.
Nanujian it's Detective Nanujian, and like he was like on the cruise down there, right? So yeah, it's always been a place that's uncomfortable, and I think it's still to this day, it's that's why people feel comfortable down there. with pretty, I don't want to call it conservative politics. 'Cause that's not what it is. It's like haterism, it's otherism, it's stuff that I'm just not with, right? Like I don't care what ethnicity you are, what religion you are. You treat me with respect, I treat you with respect. It's very simple, man.
The younger generation of writers are coming out of Orange County, right? There's a good amount right now. It's very exciting to see. Do they see you as like, oh, that's my older, or is it kind of like mutual? Like they really have to know about you to know.
Some do, and I'd say that some don't, simply because of so many years that. Let's be honest. I abandoned that place a long time ago, like I said, and I wasn't there. And once Kous closed, and I was up here, I didn't have the same connection to a lot of the new kids, but they certainly do. Like BTP and its work down there affected a whole generation of kids. And then when you see like the AUBs and what they do, or you see like any of the crews from down there and that kind of quality of work they're creating, that does come from, like, I would say it originally comes from NASA, right? Yeah. Like, if I have to give respect to people that were doing quality work down there.
Yeah.
And trains and walls, all that, and illegal productions, right? But BTP is the one that, like, I think we do get respect for having been a crew that put in a lot of work down there and a lot of work. And they saw that or came up on it, and then now, achieve that like it's nothing. So I mean, some people do pay respect, and I'd say that people know of my roots down there. I'd say that what the difference was is once the kids that get a lot of respect are the ones that did a lot of that damage, right? So I know a lot of the younger kids that do really a lot of damage, they respect the old EKs or some of the CMAs, these guys that did a lot of work, damage. But I'd say that there's enough people that I respect that respect me. It's mutual, right? Like if I see somebody coming up from down there and they are handling freights like we handled them and really like getting out there and doing it. I mean, I know what it takes to be active down there. It's a lot of work.
Gotcha, 100%. I wanted to dive into, you meet Anger from CBS at this burrito place. You say it's called Blackbirds.
Freebirds.
Freebirds, sorry. Sorry.
It's okay.
You guys meet and the relationship starts there, right? How does it go from meeting each other to you becoming part of CBS?
Yeah, so this is, it's interesting because that's also my transition to being a more serious writer wanting to do damage, right? Like that, I went from like, hey, let's do a little piece once in a while and maybe I'll catch a tag to, let's do work, right? So how it happened was, he paged me at a house he was at. I called him and he said, hey, I got this guy, there's a dude up there, Zinc, and he's going to school up there. But then this other dude, Eris, is going to move up there, and he needs a place to stay. Okay. So you want to give him a place to stay. And I had already been down to LA a couple times where I hung out with Anger and Crash. We went to Sanborn. We went around Melrose, caught tags. Yeah. So I had, started to hang out with them. But he said, this guy Eris is going to come up, and can you give him a place to live? And I said, sure, no problem. Like, it's all good. He can live in my living room. Like, it's good. And he moved up, and he was about it. Like, had nothing else to do, really. He didn't have a job. He was there kind of, his girlfriend was going there at the time, and he was up there to kind of be closer to her. And then we went out every single day, every night. Like we'd started, once he was up there, that's all we did. I mean, we literally just went and painted and caught tags. And
he was already CBS?
He was CBS, okay. So, and he was like the one to kind of basically say, look, man, you're on probation. You can write it if you're with me, right? Like you can write CBS if you're with me. If you're not with me, you cannot write it. You're not in. You haven't been voted in. But if we're going out mobbing together, like put it up because we're out, right? So it's about 6 months of solid work. I mean, daily, like just emptying mean streaks and markers and just like going at it. And we crushed that place. I mean, Santa Barbara, Isla Vista was where I lived in the little college area. It's like a square mile. Isla Vista is a pretty small area, right? Yeah. So a square mile, one side to the other. And we crushed every inch of that, every street up and down, every sign. There were other people who had done it, but not like that. And his whole vibe was like, keep going, keep going, keep going. Like, don't stop. More throws, more tags, more like just go, go, go. And after that 6 months, they brought the crew would come and visit sometimes and hang out and party with us. Because Santa Barbara, that same little square mile was like full of reasons to be partying, right? Like readily available alcohol and college ladies for the friends, right? Like, so they were very happy to be visiting. There were other crews that would come up too, like TCF had members that would come up. So Rage and Sync from KSN and TCF would come up and catch tags. And this dude, Nova from MWA, and he was... They did like early fire extinguisher tags before that was a thing, right?
Oh,
like
really?
MWAs,
Wow.
So Nova would come up, they'd catch tags. So they were the only other dudes though. That us and then Clay from BC was still up there. He didn't really like catch a ton of tags though. He like could do quality pieces was more his thing. But so they come up for a meeting and it's like 14 dudes from CBS and it's most of the core members. It was almost everybody was there who had to be there. So it was Skate, an Item, as Tren, Link, Eris. And so it was like a whole group of folks. And we went to this a Dos de Mayo party. So yeah, this is a thing. Dos de Mayo was going to be them. Everyone drank mushroom, like mushroom tea, dropped acid, and it started early in the morning. So it was called that, not out of any disrespect, but everyone dosed, right? I didn't take any hallucinogens that day because I thought what was about to happen was serious. Like I thought I could be getting jumped in right now. I need to be relatively sober for this, right?
I don't want to be super out of it and then
we're getting socked up or something. I didn't know what was going to happen for me getting in, right? So they had a vote, and it was like 100% vote. Everyone had to vote for you to get in, and everyone voted me in, right? And that was because they saw the work. We went around like before that. The day before, they went around and they saw like, oh, this guy like Eris has schooled this guy. He's doing stuff. He has throws. He's up. Like, yeah, there's no question. Like,
and you knew you were going. You knew you were gonna. You knew that the vote was going down.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I knew the vote was going down just because. It felt like that, right? That they were there with a purpose. And then I think Skate worded me up that was going to happen. He didn't ambush me or anything. They said, yeah, we're going to take a vote, right? It was weird too, because this was at a house that I was at another friend's house that had been in with a friend in high school.
Yeah.
And he had no idea what world I was in, right? So next thing he knows, he invited us to this party. And next thing he knows, he's got like 14 dudes and Skate, like big ass Skate and like dudes that are dosed and out of their minds and now we're doing like a vote for me to get in a crew. And yeah, to this day, he probably would trip out on that story because, that guy invited everyone to this party. And that was a wild day, man. So later that we all were wasted. Yeah. And Eris on the way home, we're walking back to like, I think our apartment or go to another bar or something. And he trips in the street. He sprains his ankle. Yeah. And then goes and lays in someone's front yard, right? Through a fence, had to open a fence, and then he goes and lays on their grass. And he's laying on the grass, wasted. He's dosed, he's drunk, he's like laying around screaming in pain, right? And the people come out, they're like, what is going on? So they call the paramedics, they call like the fire trucks out, right? Yeah. And this is something about Skate. Like this guy was, there's so many stories you could tell about Skate, but so the fire truck comes up, they see him writhing on the ground, and these dudes go to get out. The paramedics go to get out and help Eris. And Skate says, no, it's all right. He's okay. Now, they look at Skate. He's a big dude. They're like, this dude just told us he's okay. Yeah. And they go, oh, yeah, okay, he's okay. And they literally just got back in their truck and left. Eris screaming on the ground, screaming. I had to carry him. Everyone else didn't want to go back. They wanted to keep partying, so they were going somewhere else. And me and Item had to carry him back like commando style, right? Because he couldn't walk. We had to walk all the way back to our apartment. So yeah, man, we're carrying back Eris like commando style, me and Item. And we're bringing him back to the apartment because he can't go out anymore, right? So we passed this like these tarps that he and I had painted a couple nights before. Yeah. And I didn't really notice that it was tarps for this church. Like it was tarps for a church. And I was like, okay, so I see this. And I was like, so now I see it in daylight. I realized, okay, well, that's uncomfortable. But then people are buffing it. Okay?
Yeah.
So they're buffing it right there on the spot as we're walking by. So Eris is wasted. And he starts screaming at them. Fuck, F you. What the F? This is CBS crew. Like, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, bro. Shut up. This is across from my apartment. Like, what are you doing, man? Be quiet. So luckily, like, they just kind of looked at us like, okay, I don't know what that is, but it's something we don't want to deal with. So they ignored us. We walked by, went back to the apartment, and that was that. But yeah, that day was a mix of like, you know, the wildness of that crew in action, Eris being pretty wild, and then Skate being diplomatic like he was, like convincing firefighters to just move on. Don't worry about this dude writhing in pain on the ground. Just keep it moving, right?
You know, as an outsider looking in and the public that might not be really informative of CBS crew, can you take us into the process of why do you feel it was so important to get voted in? Like somebody out there might be like, well, why get voted into doing something like that, right? Why do you think that it was so structured and important to earn your spot and then earn votes? Because you could have put in as much work as you wanted and possibly thought you own your spot, but you still needed those votes, right?
If one person had said no, I wouldn't have gotten that thing. And Item joked around about it, like, nah, I'm not cool. And I Skate like fake slapped him, right? Like he was going to slap him down, and he ducked it. Because if you took a slap from Skate, like Item was a smaller cat. Skate was a big dude. You didn't want to get backhanded by Skate, so he ducked it. But it was a joke, right? They voted me in, right? Why that's important, and I took that forward in my crew in BTP, that same concept of the, like, you know, it's not a democracy in a full sense, but the reason is because, you know, you're out here, especially then, but I'd say still even now, out in the streets, it's there's a lot going on. And what I mean by that is you can have beefs, you can have fights, you can have trouble of any kind that happens.
Yeah.
And then you're taking risks together, right? Sometimes really serious risks, and both with your health, but then also like, you're with the law, right?
Yeah,
so
definitely.
Those risks, like the kind of people you partner with, who you want to be around, who you take those risks with, is super important. And to me, it's almost the most important aspect of having a partnership with someone out there is the trust, right? Like I want to know that someone runs up on me and they just start swinging on me, and I don't even know it, that there's, boom, we're going at it. Like, we're going to defend ourselves, right? And I know that the guy with me isn't going to literally turn and like, boop, gone, poof of smoke. And I'm like, wait, what? I thought we're brothers. Like, what just happened? You left me hanging, right?
Yeah.
So I think part of that vote process, part of that, like, making sure people are vetted and going to be comfortable matters a lot, because it can be any vibe. Your crew can have a lot of vibes, right? I'm not one to tell people how their crew should be, right? You could have that different cultural vibes or different kind of ethics about graffiti vibes, or rules that you want others to kind of like, you don't want to enforce per se, but you want them to just naturally have those same ethics as you, the same vibe as you, the same work ethic, the same view of brotherhood. What does brotherhood mean, right? People use words like loyalty, honor, respect. They throw these words around like cheap, you know, like the real cheap. And to me, those things are actions. Those things are things you show that you
they're
do.
meaningful.
You show they're meaningful, and they're done by action. So you show respect, you show loyalty, you earn brotherhood, right?
Okay.
And those things aren't just given like with nothing. That's something that I think you have to show that you deserve, right? And if the letters, the reason I was so honored to be in CBS and get in was that, right? Like I knew that, you know, Skate had brought on this big group of dudes who were really talented artists, right?
Yeah.
And they were top of their game, you know. Even Mir was at that meeting too, actually. I forgot to mention him, but he was there at that meeting.
Oh, he went down to Santa Barbara too?
Mir was at that meeting also. So, so the thing is, when like, you got voted into that, it meant that, yeah, you earned something. And there were only so many crews that I would have felt comfortable with. They were like this mix of hip hop and then punk rock, both.
Okay,
there was a hip hop wing that I would say like Rob One was in charge of the hip hop wing. He had done the KDAY show, showed the Fly ID show already that he had on the radio for a while, and then so he was doing hip hop full blown, and then you had skate and this other wing of people that were like punk, right? And so the vibe, the Melrose vibe, like me going down there and hanging with those guys on Melrose, it was a place I already knew from being a punk, and that was their neighborhood. Hollywood was their thing, and so for me, it was this combination of like, I fit into the culture, the vibe, and then I also, these guys were doing work, right? Like on those trips up and back from Orange County, I would see Crash up. He had this spot, this dude Crash, KKARASH, right?
Okay.
Like our CBS Crash.
Yeah.
So he had this spot off the 101 that he would get over and over. So every time they ever buffed it, anytime someone went over him, he would do that spot again. And it was up before I ever met him. I saw 8 pieces from the guy on this spot, right? So it was awesome to be linked with him. They were doing throw-ups all over that area, Melrose, and they were already starting to own those walls, right? So I was exposed to them already. So they were the most familiar crew. Also, I felt lucky, like I had won the lottery in that sense, and that I had met exactly the dudes I wanted to meet.
Kind of like you were destined to be there type thing.
I felt destined to be there. I felt destined to be a part of it. And then the camaraderie with the kind of the punk vibe, Aaron Skate was like, he knew the same kind of people, the same stuff we went to. And so for me, like the leader was running a program I respected. And even though I didn't know it yet, right? Like now I look back and I go, yeah, I respected that program. That was why I liked it. I didn't have a lot of reference, right? That was the first real LA crew I ever had anything to do with, right? But yeah, looking back, he was running like a pretty tight program, and it grew a whole bunch of kids that are now still quite good artists,
Skate is definitely a very impactful guy and for the whole graffiti community, at least for Los Angeles, Hollywood, West Coast, right? Can you take us into knowing him on a actual friend, as a friend, like actually knowing him and how he was and his passion for this culture that we all love, which is graffiti?
Yeah, for sure, man. He was, so I know a lot of people who didn't know him talk about him, right? Like a lot of people who talk about Skate. And I think that's awesome. For him, I would know that he'd like that, his ego, he'd enjoy that. He wasn't a big egomaniac, but he'd enjoy it. Like low key, he'd enjoy it, right? Because he liked to put out work so people saw it, right? So he'd like to know that he had effect, right? For sure. But you know what the deal with Skate, man, was he'd meet you where you were. So what I mean by that is he didn't look down on anybody. The reason he was able to have license to walk around all of LA, like he was able to go to anywhere, meet anybody, be accepted, was he could meet you where you were and respect you where you are. And what I mean by that is, he knew I went to college. He knew like that I was into things that maybe aren't so street because of that, right? And he would still, like he and I had super deep conversations about philosophy, about the state of the world, about politics, about all kinds of stuff that had nothing to do with graffiti. I mean, we had dozens and dozens and dozens of deep talks about stuff that had nothing to do with craft, right?
Yeah.
But I remember this talk. It's so funny. One of these talks where we're driving and he says, "Posh, dude, like this drawing that you did here, man, like it was like a little character of some guard in Europe that was like some weird drawing I did, some trip I had taken, right? It was some weird thing." And he goes, "What? No one's going to understand what this is about, man. You gotta do something for your audience. You know what I mean? Like you got to do something. It's okay to be you. Like don't ever change you." That was the other thing. I'll talk about that in a second with Skate. But he's like, you got to at least understand your audience. You got to like do something that the street feels, and that's important, right? So both of those things, I've taken that forward with me. That like, if you look at the work I've done or the kind of things I choose to paint, it's often respectful of the neighborhood I'm in or where I'm at. And I try to be thoughtful of like, does this make this place a better place or not? Are the people going to enjoy this? Am I insulting people with this? If it's a cultural reference, like I always try to think about that. But then also when he would say like, yeah, don't change for anybody. Don't change for nobody. Like you do, be you, period. And that's how I'll respect you. And that's how you'll gain respect. Always stand on like who you are. That goes back to like the start of this whole conversation we had of how I approach things, right? Like that he said, don't ever be ashamed of who you are, stand on that. But, and that's okay. And I think that part of him was really the most special part because that allowed him to bring together people who were different, right? I wasn't exactly like Tren, who had come from a different place. I wasn't like Anger, who had come from a different place.
Yeah.
I wasn't like Show, right? Or any of these guys, like in many ways, right? But in some ways, he could find the thread between all of us and then connect us, right? And that was his magic, really, was that ability to both see you where you were, and then also support you. Like, he didn't want you to change to be someone else. He wanted you to be the best version of you could be, right? And that's something that's rare in a leader, right? Like a lot of leaders, they want you to just say yes to what they want. They want you to be like them or
just cater to them.
Cater to them, right?
Yeah.
But that wasn't his thing, right? And then he really was just like a cool dude. Like when it boiled down to it, like some of my best memories with him were doing things that were not graffiti, right? Like we did cool graffiti, but like, going to Okie Dog, right? And if you didn't finish your chili cheese fries, this fool would have his fingers up in your chili cheese fries finishing. Like, oh, you got 3 fries and oh, you're not done? Boom, I'm handling your chili cheese fries, right? So that was like one of them, as he would do that. And just stuff like that. There was one night where we ordered, like, he figured out that you could order beer for delivery or something weird like that up at an apartment he had in Hollywood. And we ordered some food and beer one night. And this is like pre-Uber, there's no Uber Eats or whatever, but they deliver stuff. And now that night was just about hanging out and munching food and drinking and drawing in books, right? Yeah. So like some of my best times with him were just chilling. He'd come up to Santa Barbara and visit me on his own. Like, so really? There were multiple times where he came up, and it was just, those times were really special because that was like, if you're in LA with him, you're sharing him with everybody, right? Like I said, everybody's there. There's a crew. There's people around. They're popping up. You can't walk down Melrose and not have 18 people pop up, right? Like, and see, oh, look, and then you're not hanging out, right? You're he's there, but you're not like having a friend vibe, right? Yeah. But he came up, and we would, he'd come up and hang out and chill, and that part was the most. The friendship was the most special part of him for me, right? Like he was, so larger than life. I felt, and also in LA, I always felt safe. Like, so you go to a yard with him that normally I'd be like, so Sanborn right now, there's a dude that just got out. I hear he's jacking people. Yeah. Are you sure you want to go to Sanborn? He's like, yeah, we're going to, what are you talking about? We're going to Sanborn, right? So when you went out with him, you felt like you could literally like fight. He was a big dude, and you felt comfortable, and he never made you that nervous that way, right? So yeah, man, there were a lot of reasons I liked him, but really, like as a friend, those talks, he blew my mind what he knew, right? You would have assumed from him like, oh, he's a street dude, he was a punk dude, what does he know about stuff? But he knew a lot about stuff, and he had an opinion about it. And I'd say he could go toe-to-toe with these college kids I went to on many topics, like in terms of they had to have a debate, and they had to stand there and debate. Yeah. He could have gone toe-to-toe with their intellect easy. He was a smart cat. Yeah. A smart cat. And but that magic power was really the personality, man, the ability to link with people. That's something that a lot of leaders get confused about, and they start to get a thirst for power rather than honest, true respect. And that's a careful balance. Like, it's a really tough thing to balance out.
Man, may he rest in peace. I know he's definitely missed by many. I personally didn't know him because he's way before my time, but I pay my respects. And may he rest in peace. He's definitely missed again. And it's hard to lose a friend like that, Like, yes. I've lost many of my friends, and I can only imagine what that felt like. And it's a difficult time to go through, and difficult emotions, and everybody has their own way of thinking, so everybody reacts different, but it's definitely something that it's hard to get by.
Yeah, with him and Rob. So when Rob passed too, there was it's like a 1-2 punch with those guys, right? Because they were probably my two you know, they were both my friends.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I don't, they weren't just crew members to me, right? They were both my friends. And like to lose both of them. So Skate, I learned to accept at some point. Like he went out doing what he loved. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He was literally out painting a freight and got hit by a train, right?
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that's, and if you asked him like how he'd like to go out, he'd tell you doing what I love, doing graffiti, right? Like he wouldn't say I wouldn't want to go out, in my opinion, but like, you know, that's what happened. And then when Rob left, that was shocking because he got sick. And I really struggled dealing with that. I struggled dealing with Rob getting sick, and I struggled with like witnessing that properly. And
Yeah.
losing him was, yeah, still not okay with both those guys being gone, but especially the Rob, just because, yeah, I didn't. He was the next link to like. He had kept my love for the crew alive. He had kept the vibe alive, the growing it. You know, Rob was a different type of really dope friend in a lot of ways. Right?
Sometimes you need that though, brother, because I know there's some times where I feel like there's certain things that I'm doing where I'm just kind of like losing the nostalgia for it. But then you have a friend that'll be like, come on, bro, let's go, come on. And give you that extra push. And it's kind of like, it's sometimes needed, you know?
So Rob had sort of slowed down after Skate passed. He would do a piece here and there. He did an occasional freight, but he had slowed down a lot on painting, right? So he's still doing the hip hop full blast. He was doing tapes. He was doing shows. He was like very active in hip hop. And what happened was at some point, like I started to recruit people from BTP into CBS, right? And there was this whole vibe, like it started to grow again. Boom. We went from being kind of not sad, but on a downswing after Skate.
Yeah.
To an upswing. We started recruiting again. We started.
What year would you say this is?
95 is probably when. 94, I went to a meeting where there were like 6 of us.
Okay.
Like, think of it that way. There was like, so not even the 14 originals. There was 6 people at that meeting.
Okay.
By 95, big meetings again. Like we were adding people. By 96, actively recruiting people. And by 96, there were BTPs getting in. There were other people being recruited from other feeder crews, and it started to grow again. And Rob felt that. He felt the vibe. So Rob had been always like, you'd go to a show in 95 and he would say, you'd come in the room, like Rob was dope. So you'd come in the club.
Yeah.
He would see you come in and he'd say, Posh 1, CBS in the house on the mic, right? Like, and you would be like, I've arrived. I'm a rock star. Like, oh, I'm important. And it was just his way of like making you feel so dope, but also letting people know my crew's in this place. Like they just came in, and he'd go through everyone. So this was me. It was whoever with me. He'd go through all the names, right? So once I started to recruit more people and we'd go to those shows together, he would get me guest lists to all that stuff, right? Like, so I didn't pay for clubs, like his clubs. If he played, I was on the guest list, right? And we'd come in the door, and every time, like clockwork, you'd come in the door and he'd list people out. He'd go, Posh 1, CBS in the house. Back then it was still theme, CBS in the house, Ole, CBS in the house, right? So he'd make you feel like rock stars, right? And and then he started to think about recruiting people, and then that's where Merce comes from. That's where Bleak came from, right? It's from Rob, and he started to do his recruiting and bringing people in as well. And then he started to write a lot more. Like he was a lot more active all of a sudden.
Got back into it.
For sure. I mean, he always painted, but it quieted down. He was definitely more hip hop focused for a while. But once that happened, we were painting, and we started painting all the time. Like we went to the Bronx. We did a big production in San Diego. We did a bunch of stuff together. And yeah, man, Rob was back as like a writer full force.
Man, he rests in peace. He's definitely missed.
Yeah.
Shout out to him and all his loved ones. I wanted to get into BTP, brother. So you're down with CBS and you're in Santa Barbara. Do you eventually come to Orange County, and is that kind of like how Kous Cafe enters your world?
Yeah, so I could give you the quick history. Like Santa Barbara, there were other writers who were doing stuff in Santa Barbara, right? So when I got into CBS, I felt like, well, my crew's down in LA. I don't really have a crew here. I don't have people here, like in my town. So, you know, I scooped up basically the best people there. It was these dudes from a crew called 3TK. this guy Chalk that eventually wrote Jones. So he just passed away recently as well. So rest in peace, Jones.
Rest in peace.
He was Chalk, Ake, and DK, and me, and that guy Cisco were the first 5 members. And then we recruited a couple kids out of high school, this kid Kous and another kid Jokes, who started ICK. So it was a crew, you know, they're
Long Beach ICK?
Same ICK. So that was his crew back then. Like he started that back then. So ICK was a thing when I recruited him to BTP in 91. Okay. So BTP started in 91 in Santa Barbara with those heads. And then we did a lot of work down there up until the time I left. And when I went back to Orange County, you know, I was fully invested in CBS at that point. And I was like, this is it. Like, this is it. And then Skate passed. And there was a time period there of a year where I was like, I'd hang out with Item and Snow because they were in Orange County, and I was kind of doing stuff, but it was quiet. I wasn't pushing BTP anymore, and I lost touch with those guys. And so it quieted out. And then in Orange County, I was hanging out with this dude Olay, and he was kind of like a Hessian dude with long hair, and he would take me around for me to catch tags and catch throws and stuff, right? He was like my driver. You know, we get high and he'd drive me around. He was my lookout and my driver. Yeah. So at some point he met this kid Jolt, and, you know, I got a page one day that said 55. And I was like, okay, there's only one thing that could be. That's a 55 freeway. What do they mean by that?
Yeah.
So I'm driving down the 55 freeway to work. They knew I had to drive to work that next day. And I drove down, and sure enough, boom, 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 like Ole, Joel, BTP, and they had hit it up a bunch, right?
Yeah.
So they like just helped themselves to it. They like decided, we're bringing back your crew. We're going to be BTP, and we're going to bring it back. And that's kind of the first, the origins of it starting. And that's probably late 93 or early 94.
Did you kind of feel like, hey, bro, who gave you the okay to just go up a BTP everywhere?
So, look, that is how I felt. At the same time, I was stoked. I was like, yeah, these guys did it. Like, awesome. And it's terrible looking. You guys have no idea what you're doing, but like, I love it. Like, I love that you just helped yourselves to it and that you're doing it, right?
Yeah.
So that was kind of the start. We're like, hey, let's do this. Let's start the crew up. So then I went to Kous one day to do like a spoken word reading. Kous was already a cafe, 95. It was already a quiet little cafe in Santa Ana where you could go and do spoken word. And I was into that. I was into doing spoken word and writing poetry. I was a writer.
Yeah.
Like not a graffiti writer, but a writer, words. Yeah. And then I went to this event, and there were a couple dudes that were there that were cool. And this girl I was dating at the time told me, like, hey, one of these guys, you know, he writes Meeks. He's a writer.
Yeah.
And I think his name's such and such. So I said, okay, cool. And I go to this thing and I meet these guys, and then I'm vibing with one of the guys, and I think the other guy I'm not vibing with is this guy. So I'm like, nah, fuck him. You know, I don't like this guy.
He's taking my girl.
He's taking my girl, and like I want her. Like, nah, that's not cool, right?
Yeah.
So at the end of the night, I realized, nah, I got it opposite. The dude who I thought was cool is like, is the dude.
Yeah.
And the guy that I was like, yeah, whatever. Like, yeah, that was Explode. So it was Meeks and Explode when I met them. And they both did readings that night. I think my feelings about Explode were like that because he did this spoken word, like he was known as a Squelch was his other name. And he does this like performance art. He doesn't just do poetry. He does like crazy stuff and like it's wild, right? And I don't know that I was ready for it, like vibe-wise at that time, right?
Yeah.
But respect now. He had guts. He had balls to do what he was doing. So that's when I met those dudes. And then we had a little meeting, and we put them on BTP. They were local writers. I saw their books. I saw what they were doing. I was like, cool, you guys are in. So that was the first kind of, the 3 plus them. That was the 5 of us to start. And then the 6th member, where we started to expand, was I wanted to find this dude Theme from EK. So what I mean by that, they knew it. These kids knew, like, this dude was the only guy I've ever seen kill an entire freeway. So I'm talking like the entire center divider, one way to down, it's about 9 miles, the 55 freeway. Okay?
Oh, wow.
So you're talking about 9 miles of center divider one way and 9 miles of center divider the other way. You're talking about hundreds of throw ups and tags, thousands of tags, like thousands and thousands of center divider tags, right? It blew my mind. I was like, this is the craziest thing I've ever seen. I've seen a lot of LA graffiti. I've never seen anything like this. This is crazy. So I was on a hunt for that fool. And I had like a girl who knew of them and thought they worked at Round Table. So I popped up at the pizza place trying to find him. Like I was on a mission to find this dude and recruit him, right?
Yeah.
And they found him at an event that he was at. He was catching a tag in a book or something. And they came up behind him like, hey. Oh, your team. Like, and they presented it like, oh, the Godfather wants to see you. You know what I mean? They didn't say that. That wasn't the words they used, but it was like, yo, Posh wants to meet you. And sure enough, we met. He came around and he got an all of us vote in. We used the same format. Like it was BTP had the same program. Like you had to be completely voted in, otherwise you couldn't be in. And that he was the first kind of like real, like he did a lot of work. And then going out with those guys, they did a lot of work together. And so it's this combination of like, I was schooling him up on more like advanced techniques.
Yeah.
And then he was pushing our guys and me to do more illegal work because he for sure was like, and he was an illegal king. Like there's no doubt about it. Like if you talk to people about Orange, you want to talk about people respect, his name is going to come up in almost any Orange County writers, like top 5 writers of Orange County list, right? Theme, Theme EK. He's right Aura now. He's written Aura a long time, but that was his old tag. And so when we found him, I felt like we struck gold. And BTP then. Jolt recruited a lot of their heads like from Orange County that were heavy hitters.
You said Jolt?
Jolt was what he wrote, yeah. And he recruited a bunch of other people that to this day are still out there, still do stuff. So he had found Drugs and Dell.
Okay.
He had found these dudes in sort of Laguna area, Apart and Jehu and Prey. And those dudes, and like, that was, once we added those guys and we added like this whole next layer of youthful energy, it just took off from there, man. The 90s were a lovely time period for us in Orange County. And Kous Cafe, I know you've talked about it on some of the other casts. So, but the short version is, that was like our headquarters. That's where we go to practice. You do want to do a quick piece, you're bored. Nothing to do during the day. We don't really want to take a trip to San Diego or LA, so let's go do a little something. And it also was our place. We got to see shows, man. Like back then, Kous Cafe, I saw a lot of these acts that you saw at Rhyme Fest where come through for free for us. Like I got free entry to see all those guys. But like, Slug and Atmosphere, like these
Atmosphere went up there?
Yeah, we got Cannibal Ox. I saw, wow. Like, you're talking crazy stuff, like crazy groups that went through that little cafe.
It was like the early beginnings type thing?
Of underground, people that were then called underground, they're now, big artists, right? So we had a really cool little scene there, and we were able to go see the shows. We had the whole backyard locked up with our graph. And that was our spot, and a lot of people, if you came there and we didn't respect that you went straight over something we had done, maybe we might not be happy about that or whatever, right?
Is it fair to say that Kous Cafe was a youth center?
It was both. It was essentially run as a combination of like a youth center and a venue for music and an art place to do art and spoken word and poetry readings. Like we had all kinds of activities there. I even remember there was a meeting of like the Rastafarians would come meet there, right? Oh, wow. and have like the meeting of their organization at Kous Cafe. So like when I say, Black Panthers probably had a meeting there. I'm almost positive they had like a kitchen one day there and came through. So you had all kinds of people like that would use that space for positive purposes.
How big was Kous Cafe? Will you say it's bigger than this here?
Bigger than not this building, but this space. We had like the main room was maybe like this big. You had a second room where there were some seats you could chill. There was an upstairs, but that was private, like people's apartments, residents up there that were staying at the place.
So there's people living there too.
There were people living there off and on, they weren't, were they supposed to be? No, but they were up there, and sometimes people would crash there. I knew this guy, Wojcik, who was an artist, and I still have a painting of his, and he was upstairs living there for a while, and he was producing these paintings that were beautiful paintings. I got one of them for like $40 off this guy, where he put strings, guitar strings built into the painting. It's some dope artwork. So yeah, I mean, Kous was a place for us. It was a special place to have. We were lucky to have that kind of place to create and then hang out, and we could have meetings there. Right, it was convenient for sure.
You know, what's something that you feel the world should know about Kous Cafe that they probably don't know? Because I mean, there's probably people out there that don't know about Kous Cafe. What is one thing you would say that you feel the world should know about Kous Cafe?
It was, at the time in Orange County, an incredibly creative, energetic place that was almost not allowed. It almost felt wrong to exist, in Orange County, right?
Yeah.
It's the kind of thing where it was doing like a lot of positivity in terms of giving people a place to be, a lot of creativity. The bands that came through, it wasn't just hip hop bands, the punk bands that came through.
Yeah.
It's still known as like a venue that brought really incredible talent through Orange County. So it was this last bastion of culture down there in many ways, right? What I mean by that is culture, like authentic street culture, authentic music culture, authentic art culture, and all that, and then it's just a place to be relatively safe. I don't, even though that was right there in Santa Ana, and you had gangs a block away, right? It was a track right there on Main Street for both ladies and drugs, right? And so it was a place that was suffering in many ways in terms of the exterior right outside those walls. But once you came inside, it was a safe place to do some art, to hang out, to have a coffee, and
Is it fair to say that Kous Cafe was the place before the observatory?
yeah, definitely. And before all of that down there. So downtown Santa Ana, that whole culture down there, the whole art thing, all that. Yeah, there were art studios down there, but that changed. Once that happened, they viewed it as something bigger they needed to take and make theirs. The city needed to run it and make it like this whole big thing, right?
Yeah.
And at the same time when that started to happen in Santa Ana and the downtown scene started to get what it became, is exactly when Kous ended, right? There's no coincidence between like the end of Kous, them wanting to get rid of it, and them wanting to kind of reset everything and own it themselves, right? And control it, have the city have more of a say in how art was going to be handled down there, right?
To your knowledge, brother, why did Kous Cafe close down?
I think it sold. Like I think the building itself was for sale, and they sold it under Dennis, I believe. And
Dennis was the owner.
Yeah, and then he started a new one in Long Beach for a while. That was just never the same. Like it was in an enclosed space. It didn't have that open air kind of vibe, and it was. Kous was in an old chop suey restaurant, so it was like this weird residence. It was this 2-story building from like maybe the 1920s, right? It was an old building. It had never been intended to be a restaurant, right? It was a house. It was like a 2-story Victorian style house.
Yeah.
And then somebody bought it and made it a chop suey restaurant, which is why it was called Kous. Kous was the Chinese name of the joint, right? Like KOO apostrophe S, Kous Cafe, right? It wasn't a cafe; it was Kous Chop Suey, and the old sign was still up there with the Chinese, the writing, the actual writing and the name, and that sign stayed up there. And I think eventually. He had to sell it or give it up, and then he moved to Long Beach. But that vibe, you couldn't recreate that
energy.
That there was history in that building. There had been before we ever showed up. It was someone's house. Before the chop suey showed up, it had been someone's house, right? So
in the 1920s, who knows what it was?
Who knows what it had gone through by the time we had gotten it? So you could feel the. I didn't say ghost, but you could feel the energy in the place. You could feel the history in the place. It was a historical building in a historical neighborhood, and that.
How was your relationship with Dennis, the owner?
So, mine was pretty light. Like Meeks was definitely the one that was his friend, his close friend. Dennis, for sure, tolerated us. He's a nice guy. I always liked him. But he tolerated us. We were trouble. Like, let's be honest. Like I'm gonna not lie. Like we were trouble. We liked to smoke a lot of weed, People would sneak drinks in. They're not supposed to. Any of that could have got the place shut down in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
So I don't blame him, right? The vibe was like, really? You're having a meeting here, and half of you are drunk, and you got bottles in paper, and you're smoking blunts back here.
Are you trying to get me shut down or
what? So that's what's the truth of it. And then when he started the new Kous, he did invite us over for an art show. I did an art show over at the new Kous, and we stayed friendly. Like if I saw Dennis today, I'd give him a big hug.
He's still around?
I personally haven't run into him in a long time, but I'm sure he is. He always stayed active in music. He had a place called Ice House or something in Fullerton that he had before Kous. I think it was called Ice House, but he had another venue that he was running before he came and did Kous.
How was it losing drugs from BTP for you, brother?
So, man, the honest truth is after BTP ended and everyone went their own way, drugs had gotten into TV. He was in HOF.
Okay.
And when he passed, it had been years since we had like connected up, right?
Oh, so it's been a long time.
It had been a while. Like it had been years. And when it happened, for that reason, it bothered me greatly. I always liked Steve. He was a cool cat. We did a lot of work together. We did a lot of missions together. You know, he was a brother in that way I would have expected, right? And I got an invite to come to like a memorial thing from Shucks, you know, and he invited me because that was his brother basically. So I got an invite to go to that, and you know it was moving. I got to meet a lot of his new cats that he was friends with from HOF, Alto, and some of these other guys. Got to see Shucks again, which was awesome, and I've known that guy since he was quite young. And for me, I wouldn't say it messed me up terribly in the sense like it wasn't like, hey, I just had a call with him and he disappeared the next day, right?
Yeah.
But it messed me up in the way that exactly didn't happen. Meaning, I felt like, man, that really, now I feel I should have connected with him like recently and I didn't. And
so it's kind of like a regret of not connecting with him prior to him leaving.
No question that's what I felt. And, you know, I could be honest about that. I'm not going to pretend like, we were, you know, like he was over at my house the week before and I lost him like that, right? But, you know, he was an integral part of BTP. He was an integral part of that. No one's going to tell the BTP story and not talk about drugs, right? He's part of that story. He's part of the story of the end of BTP, right? He's part of like the drama that happened, right?
What is something that you could tell us about drugs that will get us a better picture of knowing him? Because you knew him on a daily basis by being a crewmate. What is something that you could share with us about him?
So, man, at the end of the day, like he wanted to do work and he kept doing work. Yeah. And I can't think of any time period where he really stopped handling trains and doing work, right? So a lot of people say, oh, I'm going to keep doing this. I'm going to keep a pace. I'm going to not take years off, right? And they do, right? They say, I've taken years off through health issues or reasons I wasn't feeling stuff and I just wasn't out there, right? That dude was consistent, like kept going and going and going. And then he would link with people that were doing work. So when I saw he had linked with the HOFs, I thought, that makes sense. Like he's always looking for a group of people to hang out with who are doing work, who he can like link with and stay active. So, I mean, the part of like, he was, you know, he lived up to his name, did a lot of drugs. Like, let's be honest, like that name's not an accident, right?
Yeah.
And so he did a fair amount. I wouldn't say like, you know, he rubbed some people wrong, did them wrong, right? That's the truth. Everybody's got stories. You're going to hear, you ask people about me, someone will tell you something about me. Let's be honest, right? Yeah. But the thing that I could say about him was that consistency. He put his money where his mouth was when it came to Graph. And he said, like, I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep doing a lot of work and I'm going to do a lot of freights. And that guy never really stopped, right? And for that, that's rare, man. A lot of even people I know who are still here, they have a similar story to me. They took a year here, they took 2 years there, and they come back. I know guys who popped up a few years ago, and they're on IG pretending like they've been here the whole time, right? Like, and they've been gone 30 years. That's a thing. These guys, he wasn't like that. He really put his money where his mouth was.
May he rest in peace, brother.
Yeah, rest in peace.
I got 2 questions for you before we get out of here. One, brother, being an Orange County rider at the moment, right? Or maybe a Santa Barbara rider. Was there ever any type of kind of conflict going to LA just because you're not from LA and them seeing you out there like, who is this guy? Why is he here type thing?
No, only because once I linked with CBS, there was no question. So the only time I ever got something like that was funny. It was the time I met Charlie and Dream at Huntington Beach. So I'm down there. By the way, they're in my neighborhood in Orange County.
Yeah.
So that's the funny part of this story, right? They're there in Huntington Beach, and I walk up to them and I introduce myself, and Charlie says, "Oh, you're one of those white dudes from Hollywood." Right, CBS, and I go, yeah, I guess, there's a lot of us that are white, and we're from Hollywood. At the time, I think I was still living in Santa Barbara, and he was in Orange County, so I said, no, actually, I'm a white dude from here in Orange County, but you're not wrong. And then, if you know Dream, man, Dream from down this way, Carson, he was a big dude, Pacific Islander. I think he was Samoan dude, a big dude. So I wasn't going to snap back at that. I took it. Also, Charlie, if you ask me, he was in my top 5 list of writers in LA ever. He's in Charlie's at that level. So I also was honored to meet the dude. I was well, I didn't like that comment, but I also you've got a 6'3" Samoan dude next to you, and I respect you, so I'm going to take the comment about white dudes from Hollywood. Yeah. But that's the only time anyone ever said that. Back then, it wasn't so. People didn't really notice either. If I was rolling with Skate, I was rolling with CBS's. I had license to be in those neighborhoods in LA I was in. Right, we painted a lot of Hollywood stuff, and because
the crew has already made its mark in the culture.
It had really already made its mark in the culture, and there was really no question about whether I should be painting where I was or not. And then in general, BTP, we did have that. When we started to handle LA from Orange County, there was a vibe. It was really, you guys think you're going to come up here and just paint Commerce Yard, or you're going to paint these yards, and you think you're going to crush the freeways? Sure you are, right? Yeah. But we did enough work, to earn some respect, I'd say. And it just took a while. It took years. There were people whispering about it. You'd hear rumor somebody doesn't like that we're doing what we're doing. But at the end of the day, still now, I have a fair amount of respect from people that we had to earn, right? And it's mutual.
Definitely, brother. Another question that I have for you, brother, is anybody out there in the world that might see this or might not see this and want to enter the graffiti world, what can you tell that individual?
Man, at this stage, I wouldn't suggest it unless you're ready for the consequences of it. The game's changed significantly, right? Okay. And what I mean by that is, so back in the day, we had to worry about gangsters and cops, but in general, the penalties were pretty light. There was no restitution was something they were just figuring out. You could kind of ride this balance of being kind of an artist and doing street stuff, and it was all right, but now, I wouldn't recommend it for everybody. And the reason is because the culture shifted, and there's a certain harder vibe to almost all the writers I know that survived the 2000s and when it became a more punishable crime, right? Yeah. And so that meant that if you were willing to do time in county, and willingly, right, not a problem for you, you already had a personality that was at a certain level. And that's not just pure art, right? That's I can handle my business, right? Yeah. So I think in general, if you're not ready for that, you're not ready to be out there in the street. Okay. Street work is street work. You're out in the street. You're going to run into gangs. You're going to run into the cops. You're going to run into other riders who are not friendly, right? And you're going to run into just people that aren't friendly these days. It's not a loved art form as much as we like to think it is by the average person, right? Yeah, definitely. Depends on where you paint. So I think the basic rule there is I wouldn't get into it unless you're willing to pay the price, pay the consequences, and really have to earn it the hard way. I think it's a lot harder to do. It's harder to cut through the noise now. Yeah. And so, I wouldn't recommend it for people unless you're ready for that. I know a lot of people kind of play with it. They're more artists and they play with it. But it's the actual street game and what it means to be out in the street. That's why street artists get sensitive, right? When people start capping their stuff. But they're out there in the street. So that's what you signed up for when you go do street work. If you want to work on canvases, your house is there, go to your room and work on your canvas, right? But if you want to be in the street, that comes with street consequences. So, would I recommend it for everybody? No. But if you're a kid and you have art talent, your choices between doing that and getting down with a gang or getting down with something like far more negative, then I would still say, yeah, the graffiti is a better path for that. You're going to find other people that hopefully can elevate you, do some art. You can find a path. I know a lot of people who have professional careers out of this, tattooists, artists, graphic designers. They work for, Google and things, right? Like they have good jobs.
Yeah.
So it can turn into something positive and fruitful that way, for sure.
Definitely, brother. Last question I got for you, bro, before we get out of here. Where is the idea the idea of a tank come from for you?
Oh, like these robots and tanks and stuff? Yeah, so it's pretty simple. I was into tanks and robots as a kid. I drew, my first drawing looks a lot like what I do now. Actually, I haven't evolved at all from 6. It looks the same as my 6-year-old drawings. Part of that's built into me. It comes naturally, those things. So some of my first characters were these 2D characters. I did a robot pretty early on, 91 or 92, I think 91. And it felt natural. It also, I was really into war games. So I used to play Micro Armor, these little miniatures games with tanks.
Yeah.
I go to conventions and all that. So I was super into that stuff. And I was really into war history, right? So doing robots, doing tanks, the idea of doing that kind of style originates in that. But then the ants and the tanks, the ants and the robots are a statement. I'm not really friends with ants or robots, right?
Okay.
Even though I paint them. But they're a statement more don't be a robot, don't be an ant, right? But then if I go paint it out in the wild, it's I'm not being a robot, right? I'm being somebody who's broken that mold of being a robot or an ant, right?
Okay.
I'm doing something different. I'm not just following the line of people, right? So that's where it kind of originates from. And then those tanks and the robots, the helicopter, all those machines, I'm so into that stuff that flows naturally. That's no work at all to me to pump out a
because you love you genuinely love that style.
And they come out of me naturally. You asked me to do a piece, a letters, I can do them. I've done good pieces in my time, right? But it's work. It feels like work. It's tiring. It feels I wish I was getting paid for it. It's not fun.
Yeah.
Whereas the tanks, they just flow and they're fun, and that's why I enjoy it. That's easy for me, and it still kind of represents the vibe I'm going for.
I also feel when it comes to drawing something that's not letters, there's no so much expected from you, right? You could be creative. As far as letters, there's already expectations for that.
Typography has rules, and when you break those rules, people notice. You can't just make a T into an I and pretend it's a T. It's not a T anymore, right? There's rules. There's no rules. I can put any weapon I want on my thing. I can have a French toast launcher on my thing, launching pieces of French toast and then squirting maple syrup if I want. And who's gonna tell me I can't make that? Nobody, right?
That's what I love about getting into that aspect of craft, because there's no so much expectations as far from my personal opinion. Last question I got for you, brother. When everything's said and done, what do you want the world to remember Posh for?
Kind of walking my own path in that way creatively. Okay. I want people to remember that when I could have copied anybody's stuff, kept that. There's a lot of people who do bit styles or adapted styles, and I want to be remembered for being the guy who had this style that people didn't have, these robots, these tanks. That's my thing, and if someone else does that thing, I'd like them to remember hey, that's kind of Posh's stuff. You might want to find you should go paint bananas or go paint, whatever. Go paint something else.
An ice cream cone or something.
Yeah, so anything, right? It's something else, but don't paint these tanks and robots the same way, right? So that's what I want to be remembered for. And so the art, but then also I'd say that I've been known to be real. So what I mean by that is a lot of people don't like me for that. They don't like me that I speak my mind or I tell them the truth. But I want to be remembered for that. I want to be remembered for being real, honest, straight up to people, being authentic, right? And that's how, that's why I'm friends with people from places that aren't, going back to the start of our conversation, but from where I'm from. That's why I'm able to go places I am and meet people I am, because of that. And I want to be remembered for that. I want to be remembered that I was open to them, and thus, that's a good quality to have as a person, not be closed-minded, and also be straight up with people, be real.
You heard from the man himself. Again, brother, I know this took a long time to make happen.
Yeah, thank you.
I definitely enjoyed it. It was a wonderful conversation. Thank you for your time. I just want to let everybody know, make sure to like and subscribe. Follow us on Instagram. Follow Posh on Instagram. Drop a comment. Should we do a part 2? Is there anyone you want to give a shout out to, brother, before we get out of here?
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to shout out my crews, obviously Lord's crew, TFL. I want to shout out to EK crew and then NSB crew. So
Okay.
these are my brothers. And then I want to give a shout out to Ola and Bat, who are dudes that do a ton of work. I have a lot of respect for the work they do, and they're brothers. So I want to make sure they know that they're loved.
Until next time, we're out. Peace.
Thank you.